Okay, Jack, thanks for being here today. I appreciate it. More than you know, I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule, because I know you have, I don't have a busy schedule, but I know you do.
This venue is a surprise to me. It's a great place to be, but I wouldn't have thought about doing an interview here.
If we're going to chat,
we can have lunch or breakfast when we're done.
We can have lunch, we can have breakfast, and we can have a beer before we leave if you want to. We may take you that long.
It's a fits-off.
That's it. I'm going to start with this. I was fascinated to find out you were born in Kentucky, but grew up in Ohio, right down the road in Manchester, all right along that same area. What I want to know is, in your early years, was racing or cars, was that part of your life?
You know, there's a dimension to life in those days that's different than it is for kids today. Today, kids have got the internet and they've got all the social media stuff. But what we had is we had bicycles and cars.
Yeah.
And you grew up on a bicycle and you got in a car as soon as you could, and then you competed for status among the other kids that were in your age group. You know, I didn't have a lot of money, and I built my cars out of junkyard pieces.
Yeah.
I always considered myself, when I started NASCAR racing, one of my strengths was troubleshooting.
It seems like everybody I sat at this table with who grew up during that period of time, they were tinkerers. Leonard Wood is the perfect example of somebody who would take a washing machine apart and turn it into a go-kart. So that was your childhood, was just tinkering.
When I was 16 years old, I had one brother. He was younger than me by 2 years. He was sitting at a dinner table across the table from me. My mother was on one side and my father was at the other. My dad looked at me serious as a heart attack, and he said, "Son, I'll be glad when you leave home." I'm taken aback by that, because I didn't know that I did anything to piss him off more than normal. I said, "Well, Dad, why is that?" He says, "Because everything I got's got tankeritis." He had an outboard motor that didn't work right. He had a chainsaw that didn't work right. He had a couple electrical things that didn't work, do what they were supposed to. I was past taking things apart to figure out how they run. I saw that they were broken. I'd taken them apart to fix them. I had some parts ordered, and I was making a few things, but he'd given up on me. He was anxious to have it back. He didn't remember that it didn't work right, but he just knew that I was the reason he didn't have it to use today.
That's a great story. I love that. I love tinkeritis. I love that part of it. So you grew up and went to college, majored in mathematics with a minor in physics. You were recruited by Ford. How did Ford recruit you?
The group that came to campus from Ford was trying to find degreed people that would be willing to work in plants, work in process engineering and manufacturing. I didn't realize what their motives were, or I'd have been less interested in than I was, because I wanted to work in research. I wanted to work in engine development. I wanted to work in chassis development. I thought that's what I was headed for. I actually had 2 interviews of consequence in college. One was with the Air Force. They looked at my math and my physics, and they said, "You'd be great in the back seat of an F4. You could manage the navigation and manage all the ordnance and overlook the pilot who's got his hair on fire." Well, I want to be the one up front with his hair on fire. And so I said no to the Air Force, because they wouldn't give me a slot in a pilot school.
Who are the fastbacks? I mean, I was fascinated when I came across that little piece, that as you worked at Ford, you got into drag racing through this group.
There was 10 people. There was a nuclear physicist. There was a couple development engineers that ran dynamometers and airflow benches and that sort of thing. Part of the frustration that you had with the Wood brothers as a Chrysler guy was all the stuff that they had that was new and different, you know, with their Cleveland heads.
So that's all your fault?
It was all my fault. They made cylinder heads that were never made. You know, they had special castings and did tooling on things that the Wood brothers were the recipients of. And I, as a matter of fact, was a guest of the Wood brothers on the day that your father and Pearson, that they got tangled up at Daytona. That was my first NASCAR race, and I was in the pits with the Wood brothers when that went down.
He's coming down toward the finish line. Pearson is still running. As they come to the stripe, the winner is car number 21.
No way. So you came to a Cup race that far back?
That far back.
That's crazy.
David Pearson has won the Daytona 500.
To me, that was a fascinating part of your story, was that you got into drag racing basically till like 78. Drag racing grew by leaps and bounds during that period. NHRA, IHRA, all that stuff, you won championship. But I just always thought of you as the road race king. When I go through the road racing, from the time you showed up, you won 24 national championships, 119 victories overall, 10 consecutive Daytona class wins in the sedan class. That's unheard of. And that's why I say, for me, that's the legend of Jack Roush. That's what made Jack Roush king, was the road
That
racing.
was after I'd already quit drag racing.
Yes.
Because I started my engineering company, and I said, that's what I'm going to use my education for. Ford told me coming in, they said, you know, he says, you've won so much that we don't have another promotional idea to celebrate your victory. But he said, if you lose, it's an embarrassment. He says, we need to stop doing this and do something. By the way, we'd like for you to NASCAR race.
Yeah.
The story that he had there was the Elliots were so secretive with their information that if things went well for them, they wouldn't take a chance on helping the Wood Brothers or Bud Moore. They'd keep it to themselves. But if they went bad, they blamed Ford for not helping enough. They said, we've had enough of this. The interaction you've had with Ford Engineering, which was great, and road racing, we'd like to continue that into NASCAR, and for that we'll give you a little money to start a NASCAR team. 33 years later, I'm still
here.
Still hooked up.
Still hooked. That's fascinating in itself, that Ford talked you into going to road racing, then got you into that. I want to go back to finish up with road racing. One, I need you to admit on camera that the greatest group of drivers you ever had was Bill Elliott, Ricky Rudd, Kenny Schrader, and Kyle Petty drive for you at Daytona.
They were the hardest headed group of drivers.
All right, so I want to go to another story, and I'll say I was fortunate to run some races later in his career. This gentleman was a movie actor named Paul Newman.
Paul Newman back racing and setting a new record, the most venerable starter at Daytona ever.
Well, a fella's got to be someplace. Why not here?
You put him back in the car at the end of a race. Tell me this story.
Well, first of all, I'd raced Daytona 9 times, and I'd won the GT class 9 times in a row. So I'd quit. I figured 9 was enough. I took a sigh of relief when I won the 2nd one in a row, and a double sigh of relief when I won the 9th one in a row. And Paul had done this movie, Nobody's Fool movie, and he had some marketing dollars left over from the movie house. And he was 70 years old. I said, we can go, but I said, I'm not going down there to play. I said, we're going to win another time if we go. So he brought his buddy Brockman.
Yeah.
We kept Brockman out of the car for the most of the race, kept Paul out of the car for the night race, and had Mark Martin and Tommy Kendall. And 45 minutes to go, or an hour to go, Paul finished his final session in the car. Come out of the car, he says, I'm glad that's over. He says, in the last year or two, he said, I'm not driven as much as I used to. He said, I was afraid I was going to let this group down. I said, well, you are, unless you go get something to eat and get back in the car, because you're going to run the last session, the last 20, 30 minutes.
No.
He come back and he says, okay, I'm ready. I put him in the car. He took the checkered flag.
Wow. So you made him get back in the car because you knew that's a big boost. Paul Newman, last stint, 24 hours, 10th victory.
Paul would not do an autograph.
Yeah.
He didn't like to do autographs. One of my underhanded tricks was for all my drivers, and you probably did the same thing, I'd give them $50 before the race started. And the idea was that if you got stopped in the middle of the night, you needed some help pushing your car back on the track, when nobody was looking, you could get a corner worker to help you if you give him $50. So Paul went through cleaning, and he had his $50 when the race was over. And he says, here, Jack, I want to give you back your $50. I says, nope. I said, I don't take cash, I only take checks. So I got a $50 check from Paul Newman with a signature on it.
That's a good trick. That is good. I'm going to have to remember that. That is great, man. Mark Martin had come to Cup racing in '81 with his own team. Didn't work out. Sent him packing back to Arkansas. He runs the ASA Series for 3 years. Then he comes back, '87, has a okay year, pretty decent year, with a Busch team, and then Jack Roush puts, as far as the Cup Series was concerned, an unknown Mark Martin. Why Mark Martin?
Because nobody with any sense or any experience as a driver would drive for me. I went to Bobby Allison, and I said, Bobby, I'd like to put together a NASCAR team, and I'd like for you to be center of it. I'll give you anything you want. Bobby was so embroiled with the Stavola brothers.
Yes, sir.
That he could see the end of his career being with Stavola brothers. He says, but I'll tell you, somebody that's not involved is Mark Martin. Meantime, I talked to Rusty Wallace. I talked to Jeff Bodine. There were some choices out there for me, but the ones I went to first said, we're not going to take a chance on a road racer. But Mark Martin was so interested in driving for me that we sat and talked with Mark for a couple hours. We talked about how many tires I would buy, as many as you need. How are you going to, how many people are you going to have, or as many as it takes? How much testing are we going to do, as much as we need to? And so we got through all that I was willing to write an open-ended check. And we didn't discuss what he would make. If we discussed at that time, I would have paid him more than I wound up paying him. But Mark's commitment to me was the biggest reason that I was given the time to be able to learn what I needed to do to be able to be an effective owner.
Earlier you said 33 years and I'm still here. I look at Hendrick and I think that's the house that Jeff Gordon built. And this is the house that Mark Martin helped build that foundation to put this where it's at. So, 88 you guys start, 89 in October you win at Rockingham.
Mark Martin wins! We're going to try to talk to Jack Roush. Jack, it's finally happened. You know, we tried for 2 years to get a car that Mark would like, you know, and he didn't much like the engines a good bit of the time either. I guess we hit on it today.
Moving forward on a weekly basis, it was Earnhardt or Martin to me. Did what Dale and Richard do during that period of time drive you guys to be better?
Steve would, 2 times out of 5, if he was there when the car went on the tailgate, he'd say, take it off, I want to change the side.
Yeah.
And one day I was listening to their meeting when they were having a discussion of how much angle to put in the body to go, and they says they can only go so far because they would hit the distributor. I said, let me understand what you just said. You're saying that the dimension of the distributor is stopping you from putting more angle in the car to make more downforce. I said, I'll make you a new distributor.
Oh, no way. No way.
And so I made a distributor that put more angle to it.
So you made a distributor that was shorter so that you could put more angle in it.
To it.
Well, that's not fair. No wonder I couldn't win races.
But Steve and Mark was always coming up with what they needed. And the year that Rusty Wallace won his championship, he tested before every race. And, you know, Mark should have won a championship that year. He won at Richmond, which was the second race.
He's coming to the line. He is the strongest car on the day. The Jack Roush team takes their second career victory.
And NASCAR had a bulletin that they'd written after the rule book was published that said you could weld any mount that you wanted to onto an intake manifold. Understanding of what the inspector was going to approve, Robin had put a 2.5-inch spacer under it.
We took it upon ourselves that due to the fact that you could weld to the intake manifold, that we would just bolt to it.
When we won the race, Richard Childress called his buddy Bill French Jr., who was holed up in Daytona Beach. He'd broken both ankles on a boating accident.
That's right. Yeah.
And so he was anxious to get involved and be involved as much as he could. And so when Richard Childress said to him, Mark has won the race with a 2.5-inch spacer, and the rule book says he can only run 2 inches, Bill says, if that's true, I'll take the money and the points. He discounted the fact there was a bulletin that made it okay, and we lost the championship.
That is still one of the calls that if you talk to 90% of the people in the garage area, they'll all throw the BS flag on it and say that was a bad call.
Mark Martin won. That wasn't too unusual, but NASCAR in a post-race inspection found he had a carburetor spacer that was a 1/2 inch too high. They found him $40,000 and 46 points. I mean, that's like hanging a guy for shoplifting.
Even with the success, you're so close with Mark so many times to that elusive championship.
4 times. Two of them he should have won. The second race he should have won, he was ahead in points of Dale Sr. in September. And Dale Sr. had such a relationship with Bill France Jr. that he would take whatever he said as gospel. And they made the case that they needed to have more kick out on the front of the Chevrolets. And Mark never won a race and had few top 10s after that. After September. And if they hadn't given that late rule change that benefited the Chevrolets, and if we hadn't had our intake manifold problem, Mark would have won at least 2 championships.
That's crazy thinking back on it because I was there during that time.
Did your car do better with an inch of kick out?
I had a Pontiac, man. I wasn't even in y'all's league. 2000 comes along, we move into 2000, and Matt Kenseth comes along. And Matt Kenseth wins your first championship in 2003.
Jack Roush has won his first title in NASCAR Winston Cup racing, finally.
Take me back to that year. What was that year like, winning that championship in 2000.
Well, let me say generally about Daytona is I'd come to Daytona to race RS cars, or front-wheel drive, four-cylinder cars for Ford. I'd raced Trans Am cars a couple times. I'd raced a season finale. I'd never been to Daytona, never won a race, and started cup racing. The fact that it would take me 18 years to win my first Daytona 500 and 17 years or whatever it was to win my first championship was unimaginable.
Yeah.
I had no idea that would be that hard.
Yeah.
Matt Kenseth was Mark Martin's protege. Mark said, you know, he came to me and he said the same thing about Joey Logano, which I missed Joey. He says, Matt, ask the right questions about his cars, and he'll get the best he can out of the car behind you, the same as I've done. He won in his rookie year. It was Dale Jr.'s rookie year. He won the Rookie of the Year championship.
Here he comes. Winston Cup win, #1 in the Coca-Cola 600 for Wisconsin's Matt Kenseth.
So he was on his way, and then on 2003, we had my engines didn't blow up. By 2003, we had it all sorted out to where my engines were good. 2/3 of the way through the season, or 3/4 of the way through the season, he'd already amassed enough points under the old point structure that we had the championship iced.
And that's what I was going to say. Matt won that championship so early. You had plenty of races to try anything you wanted to try with Matt Kenseth before the end of that year. That was a dominating year and just a consistent, just there.
That was old school.
Old school racing, just hammering it out.
Old school racing isn't as exciting as what they've got today or as what they might have had. And so as a result of Matt having that year and winning the championship, I think that's the reason we wound up with the chase.
So let's go to the chase, because they implement the chase the following year, and guess what? Roush Racing wins again with Kurt Busch.
Jimmy Johnson and Jeff Gordon finish 2nd and 3rd. It's not going to be enough. Kurt Busch is the 2004 NASCAR Nextel Cup Series champion.
That's 2 in a row. I mean, it seems like you went for a dry spell and then manna from heaven.
We were on song, so they came out with the chase. And when they did the chase thing, I had 5 teams, which NASCAR was not happy with me having 5 teams because they thought of my 5 might work its way into 10. Or something that would be less interesting for the fans, and would be less fair to the competitors as well. I told Mike Hilton at the time, I said, you know, this may not have the desired consequence. I said, I may put all 5 of my teams in the chase for you. And we did.
And you did.
And we did.
And you did. And everybody went, oh my gosh. So before I move to the next step, I want to ask you this about it. I know how cup drivers are. It's me, me, me. You had 5 different personalities, different agendas. All they want to do is win a race. How did you maintain that? Because listen, you got footage of Carl walking up to Matt and drawing back on him at Martinsville, leaving the racetrack.
It needs to be put on the air.
How did you manage those personalities inside and still have each one of them win races and make it to the chase and be in contention for a championship?
If I truly understood the answer to that question, I had great confidence in it, I wouldn't have had the law that we've had in some of our success lately. But they respected one another, and they were, I think, as much as they were interested in doing their own thing, they were fearful of not doing things that were in the common good. So they trusted one another, and they were fearful of falling too far out of line because the group had so much momentum that they'd swamp them if they got out of line.
I want to move to a different place too. 2005, we begin to see the consolidation of engine programs. 2005, you joined forces for Roush Yates engine, and you guys establish the beachhead for Ford. Daytona 500s, championship. I mean, you guys have been extremely successful, not just with your team, with the other Ford teams. What brought that about?
Well, you got to go back into the 60s when Holman Moody was building engines. That was a great time of consolidation and technology. Sure. And the thing that happened, Detroit was, Dearborn in particular, was a center of automotive technology, engine expertise. In the decades that preceded the 2005, it had moved toward Formula One ideas, Formula One suppliers in Europe. The center of it moved from Detroit to Charlotte. And Robert and I, for years, had not been on the same page. You know, we'd been adversaries, you know, much like 2 kids in the same lot, competing with one another. That's a long story that I won't go into right now, but you know, I'd done things that rankled Robert, and Robert had done things that rankled me, and so we were not friends. But we would exchange pleasantries at banquet time at the end of the year, but except for that, we wouldn't acknowledge one another. So September of 2004, I guess it was, Robert put his hand on my shoulder without me seeing him come. I looked to see who it was. Oh God, it's Robert. I wonder what he wants. What do you want, Robert? He says, I understand you're getting ready to move your engine shop to Charlotte. I says, yeah, I got to get involved with some more of this Formula One flow of technology. I said, I'm a little isolated in Detroit. He said, I built a shop that's too big for me. He said, you've got some things I'm interested in. I've got some things, obviously, you'd be interested in. He says, I'll sell you half my building, and he says, we'll be partners to the dirt.
No way.
So he was, I often say he was a bigger man than me, because I don't think I'd have made that overture to him. Man.
So here's where I want to go. Last question. Because I've been very fortunate to sit at this table with a number of people that have that on their shirt. For you, in that moment of when you knew that you were in the NASCAR Hall of Fame, how big was that moment?
That was huge. I consider the Hall of Fame's nomination to be a result of a person's investment. Your father's and your grandfather's investment, the Wood brothers' fathers and their grandfather's investment. I was slow to recognize that my success in NASCAR had really passed the test of time. And so I really didn't consider myself as being a candidate for that until they'd gotten a bunch more people in. I know one of the things that made me proudest, in March 6th of 2010, I didn't bring a coin with me, but the next time you see me, I'll have a coin for you. My son won our 400th national event in road racing, drag racing, and NASCAR. He was able to do that, so I've had so much success so many different places. To have that recognition in the Hall of Fame kind of brings it to a close for me.
Thank you, man. This has been a Hall of Fame talk for us. I appreciate it, man. God bless you. Thank you.
Hey Motorsports fans, thanks for watching. Make sure you hit subscribe before you go for all the latest news and highlights across motorsports.